The city streets were tinged with shadows as the evening slowly and inexorably fell. The flickering lights of the street lamps reflected on the puddles, creating small fragments of stars that had fallen on the wet asphalt. The air was filled with the smell of rain and smog, and the distant hum of cars mingled with the quick steps of those who just wanted to go home. But, among that busy crowd, immersed in the frenzy of the end of the day, there were those who had no home to take refuge in. A cold wind blew through the narrow streets, insinuating itself into the alleys like a whisper of loneliness. The shop windows, now closed, reflected the image of a lost child who walked aimlessly, invisible to the eyes of the world. Every step seemed to weigh like lead, and every dark corner brought with it the fear of a night even colder than the last. Stay with us until the end to discover James's fate, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. A boy of only 11 years old walked with his head bowed, his arms wrapped around his thin body, his pale face marked by fatigue and hunger. His name was James. His eyes, too large for such a young face, seemed to have seen more pain than any child should ever know. Every step was a struggle against the biting cold of the night, and against a loneliness that wrapped him like a cold blanket. The wind cut his exposed skin like thin blades, and every gust seemed to whisper to him how alone he was in the world. The stars in the sky, covered by rain clouds, seemed to watch him with indifference. James passed in front of a fountain that was turned off, where only the sound of the wind broke the silence. At that moment, the idea of a hot meal was not just a desire, but a desperate need. Hunger gripped his stomach with painful pangs, and the thought of spending another night without eating made him tremble not only from the cold, but from the fear of not being able to cope. He didn't know the warmth of a home, nor the embrace of a family. The street was all he had, and each night seemed longer and harder than the last. His bare feet, swollen and dirty, trampled the cold pavement, covered only by worn rags that barely protected him from the biting wind. His stomach growled with a fierce hunger, a desperate call that he could no longer ignore. His hands shook not only from the cold, but from the weakness of a body tired of fighting. Crossing the city, James stopped in front of a large illuminated shop window. It was as if the perfect world behind that glass belonged to a parallel universe. Behind the glass, a luxury restaurant showed itself in all its elegance. Tables set with immaculate tablecloths, crystal glasses that sparkled under the soft lights, refined dishes arranged with an almost artistic care. The smell of freshly baked bread and fine spices filled the air, almost as if it were a cruel temptation for someone like him who had not eaten for days. Every detail seemed to scream at him how out of place he was. The joyful laughter, the clinking of glasses, the intense smell of delicious dishes. Everything seemed distant, as if it belonged to an unattainable dream. Yet, in that moment, James could not allow himself to dream. He needed something concrete, something that could calm the merciless grip of hunger that was consuming him from the inside. James's heart was pounding. He had never been in a place like this, and just approaching that entrance felt like a gesture of defiance. Every fiber of his body told him to turn around and leave, but hunger was stronger than fear. Clenching his fists for courage, he approached the entrance. His eyes rested on every detail. The impeccably dressed waiters, the people laughing carefree, immersed in an atmosphere of warmth and abundance that seemed to belong to another world. People who did not know what it meant to live with ice in their bones and hunger as their only companion. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to face it. And James, even as he trembled, found that strength. Every step toward the entrance was an act of defiance against fate, a silent cry that said, "I will not surrender." But right at the door, an obstacle stopped him. The doorman of the place, a tall and stern man, with a gaze as cold as marble, stood in front of him. He stared at him with contempt, as if his gaze alone was enough to send him back. "Hey kid, where do you think you're going?" he said gruffly, crossing his arms in a superior manner. James looked down, suddenly feeling even smaller. His voice shook as he spoke. "I'm hungry, sir. Could you please give me something to eat?" The doorman laughed, shaking his head in contempt. "This is no place for you. Leave immediately." But James didn't move. Through the half-open door, he saw people laughing, enjoying delicious dishes, and conversing in an atmosphere of warmth and serenity. The smell of food seemed to envelop him in a vice. He had nothing left to lose. With a courage he didn't know he possessed, he took a step forward, ignoring the doorman, and crossed the threshold. Immediately, the buzz of the place fell into an awkward silence. The eyes of the diners focused on that barefoot and dirty child, out of place in that oasis of luxury. James sat shyly at an empty table, hoping that someone would notice him. The beat of his heart seemed to echo in his ears. Every second spent in that room seemed eternal. Every second seemed like an eternity, yet James sat with silent dignity. He knew the looks were judging him, but for the first time he didn't let them get him down. He was here to survive, and that was enough for him. A young waitress, Julia, noticed him right away. She approached cautiously, her heart tightening with apprehension. "Little one, are you lost?" she asked in a soft voice. James looked up, and Julia saw a sea of sadness in his eyes. "I just want something to eat. Please, I'm so hungry." Julia's heart sank. She knew that the owner, Stefano, was known for his rigidity, and that such situations were not tolerated in his establishment. But in front of that pale and hungry face, every rule seemed meaningless. Without thinking too much, she whispered, "Wait here. I'll be right back." She headed toward the kitchen, trying not to attract Stefano's attention. If this story is already touching your heart, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next emotional stories of courage and hope. Meanwhile, James sat still, surrounded by the pitying or contemptuous looks of the customers. Julia returned shortly after with a plate of steaming spaghetti and placed it delicately in front of the boy. "Eat slowly, okay?" he said with a kind smile. James began to eat greedily, but before he could even savor the third bite, an authoritative voice rang out in the room. "What's going on here?" It was Stefano, the owner of the place, an imposing man with a stern look. He approached the table with a determined step, staring at James with eyes full of irritation. The whole restaurant held its breath. "Who let him in?" he asked sharply. Julia, visibly nervous, approached. "Excuse me, sir. He was hungry. I thought we could help him." Stefano remained silent, looking at James for a long time. Then, against all expectations, he crouched down next to the boy and, in a surprisingly warmer voice, asked, "What's your name, boy?" "James," she replied timidly. An unexpected smile spread across Stefano's face. "Do you like spaghetti, James?" The boy nodded slowly, incredulous. "Then finish eating. We'll talk later." A surprised murmur ran through the room. No one expected that reaction from the stern owner of the restaurant. As James finished his plate, Stefano watched him carefully. Maybe he saw himself in that lost child. Maybe, in that moment, he understood that a simple meal could mean much more than a dinner. It could be the beginning of a new life. When James put down his fork with a satisfied smile, Stefano sat down next to him. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked in a tone that betrayed genuine concern. James looked down and shook his head. "No, sir. I live on the streets." Stefano sighed and turned to Julia, who nodded with a reassuring smile. "If you want, you can stay here. I need a hand in the kitchen, and in exchange you'll have a warm place to sleep." James's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. "Really?" he asked in a trembling voice. Stefano nodded. "Yes, but you have to work hard." James stood up abruptly and nodded vigorously. "I'll do my best, sir." Julia placed a hand on James's shoulder and whispered, "Welcome to your new family." That night, James didn't sleep in the cold. He didn't have to seek shelter in a dark corner of the city. For the first time, he had a bed, a roof over his head, and someone who believed in him. He didn't know what the future held for him, but one thing was certain. His life had changed forever. If this story moved you, like and share it. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories of hope and courage.